Good day. In today's day, I'm going to focus on answering the question on how to exhibit leadership skills in job interviews. And I believe there's two milestones that you should consider to maximize your chances to do well here. First is before your job interview, and second is during the actual interview. Before your job interview, what pretty much every high-performing company wants you to know is about their company culture and cultural attributes and values. So basically, when you read those, for example, when you read Amazon's leadership principles, each of those principles are, a criteria for what they qualify as true leadership or great leadership in their business, right? So this would be the best way to start around exhibiting leadership skills in your job interview, right? So now the challenge to this approach, if you only look at, for example, Amazon 16 now leadership principles, they're a bit many, so not many people can prepare on all those 16, and not all those 16 principles make sense for all the roles, right? So that's overkill, so to speak. And in my experience, it's rare for candidates to prepare on all of these, right? So then the question is, how do you simplify that? How can you get one step further to exhibit leadership skills? Well, people go to the job description, which should be, in theory, a simplification of what companies values the most for that given role that you're applying for. So at least in theory, the job description would contain only the leadership skills that are the most essential to the role that you're applying for, right? Such as, for example, Netflix culture deck is also, something that often gets pitched in their job description for pretty much any types of roles, right? Now, the challenge is that if you look at the job description, and I used to run an applicant tracking system in the past, those job descriptions are made once and then used for the next 5 years with minimal adjustments. So you can imagine, that the accuracy in what an employer really looks for in the ideal candidate is to be questioned. Furthermore, some employers, or I should say most employers, will never be upfront with you with what types of criteria for leadership are they most interested in for most roles, but still, simplifying from all the company cultural attributes or leadership principles at Amazon into some of them which are present in the job description. It's a simplification that will speed up, simplify your interview prep process, right? If you want to go one step further, what are some hacks here, so to speak? A very common hack many candidates use in job interviews would be to look for lists of the most commonly asked interview questions into these companies. It's quite easy. I have plenty of lists of most commonly asked questions in companies such as Meta, Google, and various other places. And when you look at those questions, it's relatively easy to extract the core behaviors or the core principles that they value the most in the ideal candidate, right? So this is basically the optimal way to get the minimal leadership principles to prepare for in a job interview, right? So basically, if you'd have interviewing as your strength, looking at lists of commonly asked questions will give you an extra layer of confidence in doing well in job interviews. If interviewing isn't your strength, then that would be, a superficial way to prepare a job interview. And, I would recommend stuff such as my training programs where, I go on to still a minimal but more comprehensive set of behaviors that make sense to prepare for these job interviews, right? But there are hacks here. There's ways around to simplify from that milestone, from that original milestones of the whole company, what values the whole company, into what matters the most for your specific role, right? Now, the second milestone would be during the job interview. And during the job interview, reading your interviewer and reading between the lines of the question they ask you is critically important, right? This is why some people tend to pass interviews without prepping them, simply because these people aren't only, interviewing well, but also have great listening skills. So what employers don't want you to know is that questions in interviews are quite easily predictable nowadays, and the only way they can overcome this would be to reframe them by open-ending them, making them more hypothetical, and all this stuff. So if you still manage to read between the lines of what they're asking you, for, hey, what core behavior they're interested in, for example, ownership or customer obsession, or your ability to work under stress, dealing with ambiguity and all these things, you will know what to give them. You will know what to provide them with, what they want to hear from you, and therefore, maximize your score. You will score high in exhibiting leadership in your job interview, right? So the other thing, last but not least, how do they test if you are genuine in the leadership skills you exhibit? Are you who you say you are? Many people, have a tendency to lie in the job interview, so to look more senior than they are, or various other scenarios. So this is why employers have some tests they employ to test your leadership, whether if it's true or not. And this is primarily, based on the star answers that you give them. They would ask you some follow-up and some challenge questions. Now, again, there are some tricks here, because these are, a quite finite number of follow-up and challenge types of questions which you can expect in job interviews. But, as you can imagine, employers also try to get more creative with tests, such as the deep dive test. They would ask you follow-up and challenge questions. They would go uncomfortably deep to see on whether you actually owned that project. This is why it's worthwhile making brain dumps of your highlights in your career, because some people genuinely cannot remember key details. Or another very common test would be the backbone test, when some people tend to agree too easily with their interviewer for likability or for the sake of social cohesion and stuff like that. So that's why employers are creative with these things, and you can expect to get your leadership skills tested during job interviews as well, right? So this would be a simplest possible framework to exhibit great leadership skills in job interviews. I hope you found this useful, and thank you very much for watching.